Every time he turns off the light, something gets closer. He lives in constant fear, always looking over his shoulder. What is it? Is it a ghost? A monster? Something evil? The truth is far more sinister than any of that. But first, let's start at the beginning. It all started one day like any other. The sun was shining, birds were tweeting, and John was sipping his coffee while reading the newspaper. Life was good. That is, until he turned off the bedroom light. For a moment, everything was plunged into darkness. Then he heard it. A sound like nails on a chalkboard. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. Something dark and menacing advancing towards him. He screamed and scrambled to turn the light back on. And as the room filled with light, the creature retreated back into the shadows. John sat there for a moment, trying to calm his breathing. What was that? He thought to himself. Surely it was just his imagination. He got up and went to the bathroom to look in the mirror. His face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He splashed some water on his face and tried to convince himself that everything was fine. It must have been a trick of the light, he told himself. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for it, but deep down, he knew that something was wrong. As the hours passed, John tried to put the incident out of his mind. He went about his daily routine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he turned off a light, he half expected to see the creature again. But it didn't appear. By the end of the day, John was exhausted and scared. He couldn't wait to get home and turn on all the lights and never turn them off again. But when night fell, he found himself alone in the dark once more. And as he turned off the bedside lamp, the scratching sound began again. John froze. Was it really happening again? He strained to listen, and sure enough, there it was, getting closer and closer. Paralyzed with fear, he watched as the dark shape emerged from the corner of the room. It was a hunched-over figure with sharp claws that seemed to be dripping with some sort of black ooze. As it moved closer, its face came into view, or what was left of its face. Where its nose should have been, there was only a gaping hole. And where its mouth should have been, there were rows upon rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Screaming at the top of his lungs, John scrambled back, tripping over his own feet in his haste to get away. The creature advanced, its eyes fixed on him, and he could feel its hot, fetid breath on his neck. Just as he thought he could take no more, the creature lunged. But instead of sinking its claws into him, it knocked the lamp back onto the bed with a sickening thud. And as the room filled with light, it vanished. John lay on the floor, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure if he had imagined the whole thing or if he was truly being stalked by some kind of demonic beast. Days turned into weeks, and John became a prisoner in his own home. He kept all the lights turned on, curtains drawn, and the windows locked shut. He was too afraid to venture outside, convinced that the creature would be waiting for him. He didn't sleep, eat, or leave the house. All he did was pace from room to room, constantly glancing over his shoulder, waiting for the inevitable return of the creature. One day, John's sister, Mary, came to visit. She was worried about him because he hadn't been answering his phone calls. When she arrived, she forced her way into his house, concerned for his well-being. What she found was a man who had lost all hope. His eyes were hollow, and his skin was as white as snow. He looked like a living corpse. Mary tried to talk him out of his self-imposed exile, but he wouldn't budge. He told her about the creature and how it had been stalking him, but she didn't believe him. She thought he was just having an episode, some kind of psychotic break. She tried to take him to a hospital, but he resisted, and in the struggle that ensued, he accidentally knocked over a lamp. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, Mary saw it too. The dark shape emerging from the corner, its eyes glowing red in the gloom. When the room was filled with light again, she found herself alone. Had she imagined it? Was her brother really going crazy? She didn't know what to do. But in the end, she decided to stay with him. hoping that together they could fend off whatever it was that was haunting him. The creature didn't show itself for days, but then it returned, and this time it was more aggressive than before. It seemed to sense that John was losing his mind and was enjoying it. Every time the lights went out, the scratching would begin, and every time the room was flooded with light, it would disappear. They tried to keep the lights on all night, but eventually they ran out of electricity and had to use candles. The creature waited patiently in the darkness, and when the candles flickered and died, it attacked. Mary screamed as it lunged, but John pushed her out of the way, taking the full force of its attack. The creature knocked him to the ground and stood over him, its hot breath on his face. Then it did something that neither John nor Mary expected. It spoke. Its voice was a raspy whisper that seemed to come from the grave. "You have been chosen," it hissed. Chosen for what? John thought. But before he could ask, the creature pounced. He felt its sharp claws digging into his flesh, tearing his skin and muscle apart, and then everything went black. When Mary regained consciousness, she found herself bound to a chair with electrical wires. In front of her, John was kneeling on the ground, his back to her. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but the air was thick with the smell of blood. She struggled against her bonds, but they were too tight. Then she heard a voice. "I need your help," it said. It was John's voice, but it sounded weak and distorted. With a sudden surge of strength, she broke free and rushed to his side. He was kneeling in front of an open doorway, and as she approached, she saw that he was leading her somewhere. He was showing her the way. They walked in silence for what seemed like hours, and finally they reached a large chamber. In the center of the room was a huge altar made of black obsidian, and on the altar was a single object, a small wooden box. As Mary watched, John slowly opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a human heart. The creature emerged from the shadows. "You have brought me a worthy offering," it rasped, but John shook his head. "This is not what you want." The creature lunged, but John was ready for it. He grabbed one of its horns and held on tight. "Let me go," John gasped. "I don't want to hurt you." "You don't understand," John whispered. "I am your creation. You gave me life." But John wasn't listening. He ripped the horn from its head and plunged it into the creature's heart. It screamed in pain and collapsed to the ground, its body dissolving into dust. With the creature defeated, John's body began to heal. His wounds closed and his strength returned. He looked at Mary and smiled. "Thank you," he whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." But Mary was gone. She had vanished into thin air. As John stood there looking around, he realized that he was no longer in the cave. He was back in his bedroom, and the sun was streaming through the window. It was morning. He got up and walked to the window. Outside, the birds were singing and the flowers were blooming. It was a beautiful day. He turned back to the bed and noticed something. On the pillow beside him was a single red rose, and on the petals, scrunched up into a tiny bowl, was a note. John carefully unfolded the note and read what was written on it. The words were scrawled in Mary's handwriting. "You can't hide from me forever," it said. John stared at the note, his heart sinking. He knew that Mary was right. He could never escape from her, because now he was the creature, and she was the one who would hunt him in the darkness.